All right. Thanks everyone for joining us at the session on how artisan keycaps are made. I'm here with two amazing makers, Frank from PrimeCaps, all the way from Vancouver, Canada, and Adrian from Bogan Caps, all the way from Australia. So give it up for these two gentlemen. All right, so what we're going to do today is hopefully give you guys a sense of what goes into making these keycaps. Let me just switch to this little camera we've got here. Let's see if we can get more light here. Hang on. Is this light? No. Is that better? Hang on one second. Technical difficulties.
Hey, Art, you're still possession though.
Yeah, no, that's still my door. You think it's going anywhere until I die?
Art, maybe you show that one of those kind of sus.
Oh, a bit better. Okay.
Kind of sus?
So I don't know if you guys are new to artisans or you're just, you're a veteran and you know exactly how these are made, but I know when I started, I didn't appreciate the amount of effort that went into making these things. It's not just about coming up with an idea and going with it, right? There's a very complex, multiple process set of steps, and you have to master a lot of different disciplines along the way. So we've got these two gentlemen who are going to give us an overview of kind of what this process is like, starting with, let me just switch back here for a moment, starting with the first step, which is sculpting. And there's probably a step that maybe comes slightly before that, guys, I would think, like maybe thinking about the idea, sketching it, but talk us through the ideation, sculpting process, and I'll kind of give you some tips along the way in terms of, media, 3D versus hand sculpted, stuff like that. But give us your thoughts on the sculpting process.
Yeah, so the whole thing's pretty easy. First, I just 3D print a clack, then I paint it, and then I just run a ball tool over it and then sell that.
Get rid of the lines.
Yeah, just get rid of the skull. It's not popular. So sculpting is fun. I generally, we do things me and Lisa and you do things a little different. I tend to early on I would just put clay on the base and ideate with the clay, and you just smush it around until it looks kind of cool, and I'd be like, oh, like looking at clouds when you're high, like that's kind of a dog, and then you mess around until you end up with a BBW. But I now am really conscious of how things fit on a keyboard and the aesthetic of the keycap versus other keycaps either side of it, depending where it goes on the keyboard. So I tend to start with a clay blank, and I do that by molding just a blank keycap. Yep. And then I make my own clay, but you can just use monster clay, it's pretty good.
We have some screenshots at the top too of some other...
Yeah, like that. Mm-hmm. And so I mold a clay blank these days and work from that. So I might start negatively and then go positively, meaning I'll remove material first and then additively sculpt on that. But I'm not as methodical or as detailed as these guys, so maybe you have...
Well, I was just going to say, if you guys want to know how to do it, how to start, what you want to do is take a regular GMK, row 1, X escape key, pop it on a synth, right? Make a mold of that. Once you got your mold, take the key off of the synth or whatever molding platform you're using. You're gonna melt some wax, fill up your made mold with that, and then press the synth butt into it. And that's gonna leave a cast wax version of the key on the synth, and then you can sculpt on that. It's gonna keep you inside the dimensions that you kind of work with to make cherry keys. Before he even talked about sculpting, all the steps you went through to get to that point, right? So it's a whole lot of barreling forward, hitting some bump, backing up, and just pounding at it until you get past that one thing. Barreling forward, hitting the bump, pounding at it. Mm-hmm. It's like a constant cycle of development. What you got?
Who's got a question about what a synth is?
Okay, so a synth is a molding platform.
It's up on the screen there on the left a little bit.
Perfect. That's one of the original synths. Yeah. So I think that's a V2, isn't it? Something like that. So the first version was a steel, and this is anodized aluminum. Basically, it's it's custom built molding platform made by Binge, JQ, and Salvin. And it's the base for all sculpts, basically. And I mean, there's a couple different versions of synths, or other people produce them, but that's what you're going to work off of because it provides you with a platform that you can hold on to without damaging the sculpture while you're working on it, which is...
And sprues and all that. So it goes all the way from like the beginning of your process to the end of mastering, which is like making your first keycap, which becomes the master for all your molds. And then people switch to other stuff, but we can get to that. But yeah, I think the molding part is, the sculpting part is often for a lot of us, the most fun and the most creative part, can be. But it's also probably the most arduous. Like, as I said earlier, I've got sculpts that are in their 30-somethings iteration, working on them for 2.5 years, and I still haven't released them.
What are some of the tools you use to sculpt?
We're similar, we use the same stuff. So some dental tools sometimes, not often. Silicone tools, which look like a paintbrush. Oh yeah.
Yeah, silicone tipped paintbrushes, basically like micro paintbrushes.
Yeah, some are chiseled, some are round, some are pointed. They're all different.
Softness.
Different durometers of the silicone itself, like short hardness. Some will be harder and some will be softer. And they're just like, I don't know about the other guys, I don't get that fancy. I buy it all off just like Amazon and AliExpress. And then you get these sets of like 15 of them that show up, and there's one you like, or two.
If anyone wants a decent set, get a Cloud Tool set.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, Cloud Tools, and get some no-name clay too, it's pretty good.
Yeah, he uses no-name clay, and what was the other one, Alien or something?
Monster.
I use Monster, yeah. They've got some more interesting stuff than I do. No name. I have a bunch of it if you want, it doesn't suit my style. Yeah, that's another thing. Materials will suit different people. So like, for me, when I started, I just got the same as Chad because, Chad's my go-to guy usually. I'm online with him a lot. So, and if he's not online, I'm online with Frank, and we're just talking nonsense. So, I went with what everyone uses, which is Monster Clay Medium at first, and it's just I'm in a warmer climate.
It's the hardest material to work with.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's like...
It holds every mark you leave on it. It's not forgiving. Yeah. If you want to start and you want something forgiving, get Sculpey, because it's going to be the most forgiving material to work with. That said, you're going to be limited on the detail work you can do with it. Yeah.
So one of the things that we've seen a lot of recently are different materials, like people using 3D printing and stuff like that. Obviously, you need skill to sculpt something great in 3D, but there's physical limitations with clay, like your thumbs leaving a imprint on it. You can't undo something if you make a mistake.
Yeah, there's no control Z.
There's no control Z. You can't do infinite zoom. So I think, there's physical limitations with the clay media, right? That is why it's considered to be more of sort of the traditional, harder method.
I think it also yields more interesting results because a lot of 3D models can come across stale, especially now that there's, I forgot what it's called, maybe it's parody sculpting, I can't remember, but you basically have a shape which you can import, even like a GMK shape, you just drop it in, and then you can sculpt on one side, and what you do on the left automatically occurs on the right, and then people switch that off to add organic detail so it doesn't look, but it's the opposite with clay. I really struggle with symmetry, probably because one of my eyes has prescription in it and the other one doesn't. Also because I'm drunk a lot of the time. It's like, I struggle because I'm always doing these goofy faces with one eye squinting or like, and I think that's probably a crutch of Lima. I don't know what that is, I just do it.
I think that's normal. I mean, that takes you back to like the iterative aspect where that's why you iterate, right?
Yeah.
It's like with a computer, you can always control Z, right? With sculpting, you iterate. So every, 5 to 10 hours of work, 20 hours, when you feel like you've hit a spot, you cast it and that saves it. So if you make a mistake, you can fall back on your iteration and hopefully recover at least some of the work you've put into it. So you're not just like out.
Right.
But you can be, because the other thing that happens with going from clay to resin so many times is just magically things get smaller or bigger.
You lose details.
Mostly small. Yeah, they shrink. You can end up with a tiny keycap and you're like, wait, what the fuck happened? Then you got to dig through 9 molds and you go back 9 steps to retain your dimensional stability. Yeah. My rat, I've got like so many rats. You go back to achieve your dimensional stability, which was like 7, 8 molds ago, but it's got a different nose and only 1 tooth or whatever. So yeah, it's a lot of frustration, but you've got to find joy in iteration and refinement, and you will with time, but it's a long time.
So talk to us about, the next step after you've got the sculpt is the mold, but before you get to the mold, the geometry of the sculpt could impact how difficult it is to use that mold.
So that's something you learn the hard way about geometry. Everyone does it. Everyone makes an overhang, and then you can't get it in there. So basically, what you have to imagine is you're looking at a mold. Sometimes you can't see around corners. So if you're here we go. Here's a perfect example. See that nose?
Oh, you can put it here.
Yeah.
Right? Imagine trying to get a tool in and around the corner with silicone in the way. Right? So there's a couple ways around that, but you basically have to hook it around a corner and place it.
Can you show them a mold which because I think it's hard to imagine, the mold is the negative of the sculpt.
I have the mold of this one. Okay, so here's a sculpt. This is Alex's special surprise, he calls it, or the ass. Yeah.
Yes.
Where is
Put
it?
it a little over. Yeah, there you go.
Is that going to show up?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the sculpt. And so that's a very clever way of doing things. So, sorry, Frank.
That's okay.
So that's a master base, basically. This is the mold.
It's all white. You can't see it.
Oh,
hang on.
All right, hang on.
hang on. There.
Yeah, why don't you pass it around? Can you pass it?
There you go.
Yeah, I can pass it around. There's a bunch of them.
Pass it around the master too.
Yeah, and that's a butt.
It's one of the weirdest things to think about is that you're going to be working inverted. So like everything that you see is going to be backwards, basically inside out. So you're going to have to get used to it. A lot of the problems you won't see coming, and then they just all of a sudden hit you.
I'll send out another set on this side of the room.
Where's an example?
I'm more specialized in casting and mold making, so that's kind of what I tend to focus on a lot. Lisa does our sculpting, so we have like a bit of a division of labor there. This is kind of my element.
Yeah, you guys are lucky. You've got like a team. One of you's like one of the best casters I've ever seen. The other one's like the best sculptor I've ever seen. Like these guys are crazy. I stayed with them 2 years ago?
Yeah, it was like 2 years ago now.
2 years ago. You've got this they got this insane studio. They're lacking for nothing. They could, like, in terms of art, they're the dream team. You guys are amazing. But yeah, like a guy like me or anyone else starting out, there's a lot of accrued knowledge at every stage of this process that like you either have to blindly stab at the dark at, or you have to reach out to guys like this or guys that have been. I was really fortunate to have met you guys who guided me through a lot of it, and all the other homies around. And and you will need that because most of my stuff has overhang. I'm an idiot. Yeah.
So overhang. So if you look at this picture here of the mold, so an overhang is where it's not obvious that you can just place resin in that location. It's a curve underneath the mold, right? So
So there is some ways around that. You can work with translucent silicone, so you can actually see. You can actually look through the mold and see. But there's other ways you can do it. Maybe we're experimenting with split molds and stuff like that to get access. But
what's a split mold, Frank? Where you cut it, slice it in half?
There's a ton of different molding techniques. If you actually get into casting, you'll probably dive into them eventually. But a split mold basically is where instead of doing a 2-part mold, you're actually going to cut the mold itself, and then you're going to split it apart and then put it back together after you've done your work inside. So a lot of larger castings, like statues and stuff, will be done with sleeve molds or split molds.
Yep.
So there's glove molds as well. But we don't do glove molds for this stuff.
We do them toys, but not really.
Yeah. Oh, the eggs that we did with paint on silicone. So that's like a glove mold.
Yeah.
And then we backed it with epoxy and fiberglass to make this big hard mold.
Right. So Now, you guys, so after you've got the base with the sculpt on it, you have to make a mold. What are the materials for making a mold, and how do you actually make the mold itself?
That's a good question.
Yeah, so that's an interesting process. It's pretty straightforward actually, but if you get it's actually real simple, but if you get any of it wrong, it's really annoying because there's no going back on a clay sculpt if it gets ruined.
Okay, big warning to everyone. Platinum cure silicone
don't use
and tin cure do not mesh.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're working with one or the other, it can cause cure inhibition. Cure inhibition is when your silicone won't set up. You're going to spend like 60 hours on a sculpture, go to mold it, and then you're going to pull it out and there's going to be liquid silicone on the surface that will never set, and it's just toast. You can't come back from that.
So that's when you're saying the mold material that you're using?
Yeah, the silicone
doesn't allow the resin to cure?
Yes.
No, there's two types, right? So you've got a clay sculpture at this point on a base, and you put it in a mold box which you've sprayed with mold release, which is essentially like, I use Glen stuff, but there's all different stuff out there. It's essentially like a negative of a mold, a negative of this square shape, like a cookie cutter. And you put your base, like the things that are being passed around, in the bottom of that. It's all sprayed with mold release. You pour your silicon, which you've weighed out, part A and part B, and they're not all linear. So that, some will be like, if you put 1 gram of A, you put 1 gram of B.
We should talk about silicone, like durometers and stuff.
Durometers, we'll get into silicon next. What silicon to choose for what situation. Because, don't just buy one thing and think, oh, I'm Gucci, because you're not. But if you've been using, in that mold box, let's say I was using Platsil, I bought some platinum cure silicon, some Mold Star 30, and I'm really happy with what's going on. And then I do a particular sculpt, like one of these or one of the goon bags or whatever, and the teeth are hanging over, and the silicon's got to get under those teeth.
Teeth guy, right?
Yeah, teeth guy, and create like a wall inside the mold. So it's like 2 walls where the teeth sit in between, a blind spot to shoot. Then I go to demold that, and the teeth stay in the mold and the cap comes out. It all just rips apart. And I'm like, okay, well that silicon's too hard. I need something with some stretch in it to allow that to, open up that gap enough when I'm pulling by tension and release the sculpt inside. So you might go to a lower durometer. So I'll talk to Frank, and Frank will say, try 15, and I'll go buy some
Short D.
or D15, A15.
So there's a couple
15A.
different. It goes like double O, and those are like soft, like your skin or something.
Yeah,
and then
for like
A.
mask making.
Yeah, for mask making, or like to make you look old. You ever see those people who do that?
Like Klingon mask.
Yeah, Klingon mask, exactly. That's what they use. They use really low durometer silicone.
They paint it on.
Exactly. Yeah, and then they airbrush it.
Yeah.
My suggestion to you guys, a lot of people when they start, they really like to use softer silicone. So don't be afraid to use like a D short, like 20 or something like that when you're getting started. And that's like the most common.
That's what I started with.
Yeah. We're using like Shore 50, so like very firm now.
Yeah, they're almost plastic. They're crazy.
Yeah, but you'll get more longevity out of your molds if you use a firmer mold. So
Well, it depends.
Depending.
Yeah. So if your sculpt has a lot of fur or little details, and you use a harder silicon, and you're not very sort of clinical the way Frank is in how he demolds and which materials he you're even situational with your mold release.
Yeah.
They're in depth. If you're not at that level, if you jump straight to a harder silicon and your mold has a lot of detail, when you demold the cap, it may catch. Like the bits of silicon between the fur tufts will just rip right out.
Yeah.
And if you don't have enough backup molds, or that happens, if you say, I want to do a big batch, I'm going to use all 12 molds on this batch, and it rips every single one of them, well, guess what? You're mastering again.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a backup of your master, you're sculpting again.
So that's something people don't think about, right? They're making potentially hundreds of caps from these molds, and as they're taking the resin out of the mold, it could damage the mold and have to start over again making that mold. And if they don't have a clean master to start from, they're sculpting again potentially.
Yeah, and that's all based on that's material choice, which you're the king of, so you should talk about that, like material choices for situations.
I mean, it really depends. I mean, we run a couple different silicones. I kind of settled down on a filled silicone 50 durometer, which is extremely firm, opaque, blue, whatever. It's great. You can see the colors when you're putting it on, which is another thing you're going to learn. Is you might be like, wow, I really like working with translucent silicone because I can see the interior of the sculpt as I'm working on it. but it can have an effect on like how you place your colors and stuff, where
100%.
where it can like mess you up by having like light shining underneath, which can have an effect on the color. This is really complicated stuff. What we're getting into the weeds over here.
They were like with my pink molds when I was using that pink stuff, which I still use a lot. It's just common in Australia. I found that I look at my box of stuff I'd made for that year, and I've done a whole lot of pink, purple, and blue caps. Just because my silicon's pink, and when I put like, let's say, yellow in it, it color shifts like to your eye, and it doesn't. And you keep adding pigment because you're like, why does it look white?
Exactly, it's going to have an effect, right? If you're adding a color in, the color of the silicone underneath will change the color, so it can throw off your casting if you're like following a process or trying to do your color matching exactly.
And you can buy these silicons. They're usually a 10-to-1 sort of situation where they take dyes, and you can also, I bought one, I really like it, you can also change your durometer by how much of the part A. So it'll, like when you buy it, it'll say shore hardness 20 to 80. And you're like, well, what does that mean? It's a range, I don't understand. And then they'll sell a set of dyes separately that you can buy. And it's just white silicon, but all clear. And you can add dyes to color it if you want to or not, but also the amount of part A that you put in. So it's 10-to-1 will give you the 20 shore hardness, but 12-to-1 might give you 60 shore hardness. They give you a little chart with that, which is interesting.
Just make sure you test it before you put it on a sculpture. That'd be my only suggestion, because you don't want to throw your work.
Yeah, just cast like a...
Take the risk with it all.
Yeah, just cast like a GMK blank first. The other one, I didn't finish before, like if you're working with a harder silicon and you need to go softer because of the overhang, and for whatever reason you don't read the labels properly or the MSDS of what you're buying, it's boring, but you have to do it.
MSDS is Material Safety Data Sheet, which basically some stuff can kill you, right? Or hurt you.
It's harmful.
We use a lot of safety stuff, and I've again learned that from you, like the big...
we do like full room ventilation. And we use hoods to work in and stuff like that. We just constantly are venting air to the room.
And masks.
When
you're spraying.
When you're spraying mold release, you probably want to wear a mask. Probably don't want to do it inside in an enclosed space.
You're laughing at me because you know I'm dying of cancer. I don't wear a mask. They're that.
So guys, if you think about a traditional 2D artist painting or doing watercolor or whatever, we haven't even gotten to the point where they're applying resin to a mold, right? So the sophistication of creating one of these tiny little keycaps, we're about 25 minutes into the conversation, and all they've been talking about is silicon mold types, material safety data. And by the way, this is on purpose because I think there isn't enough appreciation, right, for what goes into these things, what goes into making them. So just thinking about what the cap's going to look like, sculpting it in this clay medium, thinking about the sculpt geometry, figuring out how you're going to make molds that last and place them. That sounds like about 50% of the work before you even get to the...
Yeah, it is. And don't mix up the wrong products as well. So if you're using a particular mold release and it says on the thing used for urethane resin, then don't use it for epoxy. Or if you've used all your molds with tin cure,
that's the big one.
Yeah, this is the big one. If you've used your molds or your boxes or your bases or even your bench with tin cure silicon or plat cure, clean everything down with isopropyl, to do a lot of cleaning before you use Platsil, because if the two touch in even the tiniest degree, you'll end up with just a wet mold no matter what you do. It's just gummy.
Well, this is to the point where you can contaminate your sculpting materials, and then later on down the road, if you use that material, it'll cause inhibition for your silicone.
Even your powders, like your glue powders and stuff, they will absorb certain chemicals. I used to have them all in little film canister things, and I'd leave the lids off, like glue powders, UV powders for casting. And now I use universal mold release. It's just like the standard one you buy. I really like it.
That's the smooth on stuff?
Yeah, it's the blue can. It does a really good job of all materials. It's not fancy, but it's good. So I use that, but before I was using a wax-based one, which is better for silicon on silicon, but you can use it for everything.
Yeah.
And With the man, it's heavy. The mist goes, it stinks, but the mist is heavy, right? With Universal, the mist goes, it's everywhere. It's very, very light.
So this is an aspect that may not find in other art forms, where you're literally dealing with toxins.
Oh, 100%.
You're venting. You have to think about your room, vent the room, wear gas, gloves. People develop allergies to this stuff too.
Yeah, it's very easy to become sensitized to resin.
Yeah.
If you guys aren't aware of that, it's like an allergen. So if you do start casting and you notice you start getting rashes, you should probably pay attention to that, because it means you're getting a resin sensitivity. So it's just something to keep in mind.
It builds up.
It builds up.
It takes about a year.
Depends on the person. Some people will get it sooner than others. Some people will have it immediately, depending. So just be aware of that, because it's definitely telling you that you probably shouldn't work with the materials.
And you can change it up. You can work with, epoxies or something else if it doesn't work.
Exactly. Yeah. You can work with epoxy. That's a great workaround.
It's not as toxic.
Yeah.
But it's a pain to work with.
So we talked about sculpting, we talked about molds, making molds. Now, before you even start doing your quote-unquote painting or putting in resin, you have to prepare the resin, right? It's not just, I take red and how do you get the colors? How do you create colors you want? Metallics, glow in the dark, all those things.
Lots of, I mix 20, 30 colors a day for like years. And after a while, you just start to get a feel for it, to the point where now I've got a wall of colors that just go boop, 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 boop.
And Frank, when you say color, what do you mean?
Okay, so we're talking about materials here. So you've got pigmentation, you've got powdered pigments, you have liquid pigments, you have dyes, which come in a variety of different types. Polymeric dyes, which are designed to fit into the polymer chain. There's alcohol inks as well, which are sometimes not as compatible with polymers. So
PTFEs.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I use mostly.
Yeah, PTFEs, exactly. Yeah. And of course, there's like glow in the dark, neon. I mean, there's the whole gambit.
Color
You can't even
shift.
imagine. Like
Heat sensitive.
we have like thousands and thousands of powders and pigments, and it's just like just the room is just full of stuff. Like
It's literally a wall half the size of this wall and half the height that's completely pigmented his house. Like it looks like an old school pharmacy.
I don't take any, I swear.
Not anymore.
So how do you make it? How do you guys make it consistent, right? So if you're casting,
color matching.
yeah, color
Yeah,
matching.
color
So
matching.
and we have a picture up there. This is, I think, what Rob was trying to do, color matching to a key set. Key set matching is often it's a lot more of an art than
So
a
I think
science.
like artists, we've all got different approaches.
Yeah.
So like,
different.
you watch a watercolor guy work, you watch 3 different oil painters work, and they all work different ways. So similarly, like with my oil painting, this is just an example to give you an idea of how we all work differently. I'll paint completely black and white in acrylic, and then over the top I'll use translucent layers of color so that I don't have to think about shading. So if I need like a peach tone somewhere, instead of making a dark peach and a light peach, the black and white image underneath is doing that for me. And I do the same with my casting a lot. So it's in reverse though, because you're working backwards in a mold. So I work with translucent dyes, and I'll layer it. So if I know I want dark under the eyes, instead of mixing a dark version of the color that's going to be behind it, I'll just do like a really translucent smoke gray under the eyes. And in the molds, it just looks like a little piece of wet, like you can't even tell I've put color down there. And you just build it up. And then the final shot might be a more realistic, semi-opaque skin color. And then when you demold it, you've got all the different layers of shadow and light that sort of
That's the most fun part of casting, honestly, is getting into it and layering your colors and like learning your materials, how much time it takes for each one to set, how much time you have to work with, and then, because I'm going to tell you, if you're working on a series of molds, you can run out of time. So you're working, your resin can set, and then when you finish it, it won't actually cross-link with the key. So,
delamination.
Yeah, exactly. So cross-linking is where your resin, it actually like molecularly links with each other, and after a certain amount of time it can set up so much that it can't link anymore.
This is when you're placing different colors.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
your material's more forgiving than mine.
It
like
is,
you got
yeah.
longer. I've got the same as like Chad, and Liam's the same as you. So, but there's a few different schools of materials. But some people have like 1 to 5 minutes to get those shots in, no matter how many molds you're working with. Otherwise it sets up. And some people have 5 to 15 minutes.
some people can have like a day, if they're using
It
epoxies.
depends if they're using epoxy.
Yeah,
and then
so-
also heat plays into everything.
It does.
So heat with some materials, for example, you take the same affected source, which is heat in this case, and for Frank's materials, heat will keep, if I'm not wrong, it'll keep your chain open longer because the material stays softer.
No, for us, it shortens it.
Oh, so for us it shortens it.
It's the same for
Oh,
both of
it's
us,
the
but
same?
we just have a longer window than you.
Oh, okay. I thought that heat keeps your cap softer so you can add more to it.
No, unfortunately.
So something like doing resin writing, like this Archie, this is the collaboration that Bogan. The little drawings, for example, on the surface there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you have to get the resin to a certain viscosity that can be placed, and then like explain that to the audience?
That's where the heat comes in, right? So it's all about temperature, your materials. You're gonna have like a coefficient in your resin as you work with it, where once you mix it, it's gonna start, the temperature's gonna start to rise. It's gonna gradually rise, and as it rises, it starts to cross-link at a molecular level, and that's when you can actually really work with it. When you freshly mix resin, it's very wet, very liquid.
Exothermic?
It's exothermic, so there's like a chemical reaction happening that's gonna heat it up while it's cross-linking. And when it's doing that, it gets thicker, so you can scoop it out and you can lay it in, and it's gonna actually stay where you put it.
It won't. Imagine trying to draw a picture with a toothpick and water, and then trying to draw a picture with a toothpick and toothpaste.
Yes.
That's the difference. And you can sense it by just playing with the cup. I'm not the best resin writer, I'm probably the worst in this room, but you can sense it by playing with the cup, or you can sense it by, like, the cup gets hot, like it's an exothermic reaction. So the two chemicals mixing together create heat, which thicken the material.
A little trick I use is an infrared thermometer.
Yeah.
You can really, once you get to know your materials, you can like track your, like where the temperature is at, and then you know how much time you have left.
It's crazy.
To work with it. Is it that crazy?
How many
Crazy.
people, when you look at a keycap like that, right? You think, oh, cute shape. Maybe you think about some resin. Like these guys are like they're talking about detailed chemistry, exothermic reactions, while they're wearing masks, trying not to inhale toxin resin. It's amazing.
You should see when I leave the mines, the resin mines. You get all the resin dust all over your face.
But it doesn't go that deep after a while. Like it becomes so second nature that you just sort of grab your molds.
Yeah.
You have an idea of a
used to
colorway
it.
in your mind. You're like, oh, I want to do like that shirt, like a pastel thing. Sometimes I buy a
colorway, actually.
It's a great shirt. Yeah.
That's
that's a
AD.
key set.
yeah, totally.
So yeah, you can do a key set, or you can like sometimes I buy a pair of sneakers, and you'll just like, oh, I want to do that on a keycap, and you're so used to the process that it's just no big deal. You grab your molds out, you spray them, you shoot them, you put them in the pot. Your little alarm goes off, a little oven timer that says, oh, next shot time, and you do it again, and you're done.
Yeah.
But it's at first, like, if I was to tell someone who's starting out from the beginning, I think the most arduous part of this conversation we've had with you was material choice.
Yes.
So just ask someone who knows what they're
Ask
doing.
someone who knows, yeah. And
Don't just buy shit.
just shoot us a message or
Yeah.
something. We'll tell you. Look, if you're stuck, just holler at us. We'll help you out.
Yeah. Everyone's happy to
give you
help,
a.
especially Chad.
So talk about the different.
Hit Chad up the most.
We talked a little bit about resin writing, but there's other methods like masking, slush casting, infill. Techniques. Talk a little bit about kind of some of the common techniques that you've used. Or
I mean, that's all I do is technique. It's like a constant evolution, right? So that's going to be the first. Everyone starts out doing pick and place, and pick and place is what we call where you're placing colors into sections of the mold that you've specifically sculpted to hold that resin. Techniques kind of start to spiral out of that. So as you're going through your process and learning how to cast, you're going to start to notice different things you can do with the materials. Make sure to hang on to those things, because in the future, that information can come back and become very useful for you if you're trying to develop a new technique or something like that. 90% of our techniques have come out of accidents or experiments that we do just on a day-to-day basis. So you really got to like hone in on that. But what techniques are is it's essentially a different methodology for using the resin that goes beyond. It's like basically using the same information you guys already have for like time periods and stuff like that, and then just working the resin in a different way. So we started out with deep field, which was basically like night sky. And that was back in 2017. And
Do you have an example of that in your case?
we still do them sometimes.
There's one here. There's one right here.
Okay, there you go.
I don't know if that is
swap-
going to pick it up. But,
It might be. It might.
Some
Yeah.
light on it.
but basically, yeah, it's going to be a way for you to maybe express something in a different way with your materials. We did some that are like cloud chasers, we called them, and that was supposed to simulate the clouds in the sky. And you're working the resin in a particular way to kind of mimic.
So the lensing at the front.
Yeah.
A lot of clear at the front, and then he's got layers behind it of different opacities and different materials that refract light in different ways. And it gives you an image of depth, which is like, it's such a PrimeCaps thing. I don't see anyone else do it. I think it's because it's a pain in the ass. Most of the PrimeCaps stuff here is so hard to do. It's amazing.
Well, no, it gets easy. You just got to work your technique.
Get used to the technique.
Yeah,
So
get in those resin lines.
what I think, Adrian, you mentioned to be mold static. What's that?
Yeah, okay, so let's say for whatever reason, when your pressure pot, the way you've had your pressure pot set up, the air goes in the side, or some people do it vertically down. It's just whatever pot you got and whatever joiners and taps you put on it, it's like Lego, that's how you set it up. But let's just say the air's spiraling inside that pressure pot when it's filling up. That is something that can create static on your molds. Or let's say you got a bit of schmutz on the side and you rub it with your thumb.
Just sitting in the room with air. So we're in a room, and the room is getting vented and having air like blasted around constantly, and just the air like flowing over your body will charge you with static.
Yeah.
And that's the resin is super susceptible to static, depending on where you live. If it's humid, that's not going to be a problem, but
It's the worst thing.
it can like suck the when you're going in to apply resin into your mold, it can suck the resin right off the tip
Or
of your
explode
tool.
it out of the mold.
Exactly.
It's like it's the craziest thing to watch because you blink and you're like, wait, did that just happen? And you try it again. But you've got the mold sitting there and you've got like your tool. Some people use a toothpick. I use like a chopstick with a dental tool on there, and you grab a little dot of resin and you go towards your mold, and it just hits you in the glasses. Wait, what?
That's why you wear safety glasses.
And the mask.
You should wear safety glasses.
Yeah, and a mask and wash your hands. Don't get resin on your nipples. You get the mold just doesn't want the resin, or it really wants it bad.
Yeah.
So when you're placing it into this thing, there's enough static that it sort of pushes it out.
Yeah, it'll like suck it to the side and stick it there in like a great, like we've gotten micro spirals finer than anyone could ever.
Oh yeah, like a
just been like that magnetic field pulling the.
It's actually really fun to watch, but if you're like 4 shots deep, let's say you've done the eyes, the nose, the teeth, the gums, right? And now you're going to do some resin writing over the main body. And you go to put that shot down, and just because of the way that was sitting in the pot, or your sleeve rubbed against it, something happened, it made it static, and it all explodes in there, right? You can't clean that up.
Yeah.
You can set the shot.
The mold is
and make
pretty
it
much
hard.
done, though, right?
Yeah, you got to restart.
You got to restart from the beginning. Yeah.
You like pull it. If you guys ever mess up your molds too, and you can't clean them, just fill them up with some resin and then pop it out. It'll take everything
single
with
shot
it.
'em.
Yeah, single shot them.
So once you've placed the molds, do you talk a little bit about the curing process? What's a pressure pot? What does that do? And
Well, in Chad's case, it's a piece of pipe with a bike pump. No, not anymore, but it was. It's like a metal cylinder with a lid that's originally used for paints for people to like paint cars or paint houses with an air compressor.
A paint spraying. Basically, it's like a vat that a painter would load their paint into, force pressure in, and then has a downspout that sucks the paint up and out the gun. And we originally started modifying them, so people would buy the pot and then disassemble it, take the downspout out, put a bolt in to plug that up, and then you can use that as your pressure vessel.
But now they sell specific ones.
Yeah, they made them. You can
There's
get
an example.
specific casting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a mix of both. I have like 3 that look pretty similar to this, and one that's like the most ghetto, old school spray paint thing, but I still use it. I don't know. I've been using it for 3 years.
Be careful with this because you're working with pressure, and you guys know pressure can hurt you.
Well, I found that like
60
I probably
PSI.
shouldn't say this. No, I won't.
now you can. We have some makers that do what's called gravity casting, right? Where they're not using this. But explain what does this do? Like it forces the bubbles out.
So there's 2 stages to making sure. If your cap gets bubbles, it's either going to look crap from a certain angle or it's going to be non-functional. right? So there's two things you can do. One, you can vacuum, which is the opposite of this. It's basically a pump that sucks air out of a chamber, and you vacuum your resin, and you watch all the bubbles come out of it, and then you work with that resin. If you've got a fast cure time like I do, and like some of the guys here, some people skip that step. I do it, but you got to work in smaller batches, all different material. Then the second part is this. So instead of sucking the gas out, it's putting pressure on it and making a bubble.
Crushes the
bubble to something so tiny you can't see it anymore.
But different pressures will do different things too, right? Like, so here's a little trick. You can run your pressure pot at 20 psi, and you can actually like get bubbles out of your resin without, and that'll actually dislodge the bubbles rather than compressing them. Yeah. So 60 psi is a normal pressure that makers work at for compressing bubbles to eliminate them. But if you have a lot of bubbles, you can nudge them out at 20 psi, which will actually kick them out of the mold because they shrink a little bit. And then they'll float out of the resin. They'll be trapped on a geometry on the sculpture.
There's nothing to do about that.
Yeah. So you can get them to come out, and then you crush them down. But basically, it's
the speed you fill your pot, you can achieve both. If you have enough time to fill your pot slowly.
Exactly.
Yeah. Then you can achieve both.
Yeah.
And once it's finished in the pot, you're sort of, it's a bit of suspense, right? You don't know what it's going to look like when you take this mold pot.
Well, it goes in there in between every shot. So
most
talk
caps
will
about that.
have like, I don't know, 6 to 20 something shots, most caps in that range.
So talk about the time, Adrian, in that case. Like, for example, like if you take, one of these.
Doesn't matter what cap, but if you take two apart, A and B, you might dye the A or dye the B depending what material you're working with. Mix them together. You've got a bench time or a work time. Let's say that's 5 to 7 minutes on average for the most common materials. You put that in as many molds as you can cleanly do without jeopardizing the whole batch. You put those in the pot. Depending what temperature the heat band or heat pad you've bought to stick to your pot is how long they will stay in there. But basically you want to keep them in a state where they'll link to the next shot and they won't delaminate, so they're not fully cured, but they're not soft enough to start bubbling up. And that's trial and error, and my answer's not going to work for you because you've got different weather.
Everyone's different.
You're at a different elevation, like sea level to me, and all that affects it.
So you could theoretically work for hours on that cap, curing, taking it out, putting the next shot in, and
then you
mess it up. Right?
Yeah, that happens a lot.
And so there's this concept of yield. Can you explain what yield is in terms of, because that factors into the economics of making caps, right?
Well, I mean, you really in the end get what you get out of it.
And you don't get upset.
You can't. You got to try not to get upset. Right. It can be pretty discouraging. When you've spent 24 hours working on something, developing the idea, working through it, and then you hit a roadblock where you cast it and you made one mistake, like one color's off, something isn't set right, you get a delamination, and that always falls back to like you just got to keep hitting at it, right? You go back and you start over, and at least you've got some work done. You can recover some of your color work that you've done and kind
you
of
learn from it. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. It's like anything. But still, even like I haven't been doing this half as long as him, but 3 years in, I'm still making mistakes. 1 out of 3 casts is a mistake. I mean, and some of them are at a point in the cast, hopefully, and most of them are at a point in the cast where I could salvage it and still get something out of it.
Salvage it how?
So I can pick that shot out. It's not laminated to another shot. So
before it gets.
So when I have 2 different ways of casting. Like if it's something with a mouth, which a lot of my shit does, unfortunately. I have to teeth. I have to do the teeth first. And then I'm like, okay, well, I'll put the gum over that. Because if I do teeth first and start working on the eye and come back to the gum 2.5 hours later, that gum's been in the pot every single time I put a shot in for say 20 minutes. Yeah. And it's rock hard and it's toast hot. Right. So then when I put the gum on it and pull it out, the teeth just fall off, for example. But that doesn't happen anymore because I layer, I'll do like the teeth, the gum, the uvula, the throat, they're all concessive shots. Yep. So they're making sure they're laminating and it just radiates out from your starting point. But some sculpts, for whatever reason, you have to shoot other areas And you know, if I know I'm going to have to do like some form of resin writing, which again I'm terrible at, I'll attempt to do that before there's a linking shot that will touch it. So I know I can pick that out.
So now you've gone
That's
through.
actually a good suggestion. Let me just throw something in there quick. If you guys are worried about one of your shots delaminating, so say it's going too late, you can always you can back it.
Yeah.
You can actually like back it, and then that'll like create a new resin surface for you to work off of.
I do that too. And often, like, you know, with certain things I've worked on, like not anymore, but things with glasses or whatever. If there's a reason, like the glasses sit a lot deeper in the mold. You know, sometimes you're trying to work in terms of depth, like what's closest to you and what's further away from you in a mold. What's the deepest part? Because it's like, it's water, right? It'll just like settle in a part and then you've got a new surface to work off. Yeah. And, you know, if I, for whatever reason, I can't keep backing the same part I'm working on and create that, you know, cohesive level of stuff, I'll go back and just with a really thin bit of resin and just touch that area again, even though it's already filled. I'm just adding some fresh stuff to stick to.
That's really handy. That's one of the things that's really going to train wreck you sometimes. So that can be
delamination.
Delamination is really hard to deal with. Some of the beginner materials are very fast setting, so that's going to be your big problem at the start is delam. If you want to avoid that entirely, work with epoxy because you're going to have a 24-hour window to add to. You can go to bed and get up and work on it some more.
It'll kill your molds because it does, but it's the best beginner material. I started with 325. Worst beginner material. You have literally, it's all I could get in Australia at the time. Now they have everything. But you have literally 2 minutes. You have 120 seconds
to bond for the next layer of bond.
To do your shot. Otherwise, if you even at 90 seconds, it's bubbling. In my temperature, where I live, you know, if I was in a cooler, drier place, then maybe it would be better. I don't know, but and then your pot life is 15 minutes. So if it's in the pot longer than 15 minutes, even if it's 16 minutes, or if the temperature is 1 degree Celsius higher than it should be, it's not going to laminate to the next shot.
So you've built you've sculpted the thing on the base, you've built molds, the molds look okay, you've placed the resins, cured multiple times, you've taken it out. You're still not done. What's that last step? Finishing
Sanding,
steps.
Polishing, packaging.
We do the whole, like, we go up and hold it up in the sky. You know.
I have a 10x. Oh, you're blessing it. I have a 10x
like
magnifying lamp because I have shit eyes, but also because like I'm just paranoid. Everyone has a macro camera these days, and macro shots are really good. And so I get really paranoid that someone's going to get a cap and look at it and say, "Oh, there's a." And if I look really close, there's testicles on this one. And so I throw So I do that a lot, and a lot of my B stock is basically just
B stock bin. Whenever you meet a artisan maker, ask to see their B stock bin. Because
don't touch it.
and
think about how much hours went into each of those B stocks, right?
We have like a 40. What was that?
You have a warehouse.
We have like an 8-gallon bin just of all B stocks, 100% keys. It's like. What is that, like 5,000 B stocks or something?
It's like what we use in Australia to roll out from the garbage on a Thursday.
I don't know, it's not that big. No, it's like a little Tupperware. It's like a little Tupperware.
You have a lot.
And basically that's like person months or person years of time spent, right? That in stuff you can't sell.
But that'd be that's the same for every maker.
Every maker, sure.
Yeah, they all go through that.
Well, that's the point,
Yeah.
So any questions from the audience? We'll pass the mic around.
Hi, I'm Mgsickler, and I'm definitely interested in designing and making custom keycaps. I was wondering, regarding the stems you guys use, because I understand some keycaps are 100% resin, like even the stems are resin, but also there are keycaps where only the cap is resin or clay, and then the stem is made of, I believe it could be PVC plastic or some type of plastic from a 3D printer. So my question is, what is your preference and how do the process differ from having full resin versus like additional stems?
It's a great question. We didn't talk about stems much, which is
That's a good point, actually. I mean, it depends. I mean, okay, so What you're talking about is, I guess, for people who want to like, I mean, we've seen some of those recently. Chad just did one where he combined a hard stem with a rubber top. So you've got like that mixed. Basically, what they're doing is when you're casting, tolerances are key. And it's really hard to get tight tolerances. And everyone here knows how annoying it is to have a loose key. It's really hard to keep your keys tight. So I think that for a lot of people, it's easier to just take a stem that you already know works and transfer it onto what you're doing. The way to do that, if you're curious, it would be, you could actually just take any old cherry key, go in and you could actually like cut the stem out of a key and then just mount it on here, right? Like just press it in. And then when you finish your casting, you just close it and it'll like come apart as part of that key and you've got a stem from something else.
Or you can just rip a bud if you're...
Yeah.
So the rip a bud is like you'd grab a keycap adding collection that you think has a good, or better to use a GMK one in honesty or something, whatever. And you put it on a base, just like we were talking about earlier, and you would mold that. And then when it's time to demold, you would leave the keycap in the mold, don't remove it, spray mold release, put it back in the molding box with enough space and refill. So you can do that as a beginner, but I think you'll find like very, very quickly that you want a molding system.
You want to use your own stems. We all do our own. We all like we just like do it part of the casting.
Yeah.
The only thing I would say is that you just want to figure out your shrink on your materials, because if you can figure out your shrink, you're going to be able to tell if
it fits tight.
Exactly, if it's going to fit tight and like how much it's going to shrink, right?
But there are thankfully a lot of people in our community, because there's a lot of different facets to it, like different trades within the community, and you can find a few guys that only make butts and stems for people in terms of molding systems. And you just buy it, they'll 3D print it for you, they'll put your logos in it, everything
nail
like that.
Let me ask Glenn to see if he would...
Glenn's the man.
Molding system. I think in general, molding systems refers to the engineered hardware that you're going to use to do all the things that they talked about. And it's kind of completely separate from the art itself or the sculpt. The idea is you could take any master shape, whether that's a blank or a sculpt, and you can then take that form. It would be very difficult to cast on its own, put it in a very specific place on a system that is designed to make it as easy as possible and as consistent as possible to go through all the steps that I talked about. And a lot of the reason for that is stems. Like
Stems.
you do a whole panel on stem fit itself. Kind of matters a lot. And at the end of the day, these are keycaps, right? They need to perform their function, which is to put on your board and stay on your board. So if your stem fit doesn't work, it seems to me that defeats a lot of the purpose of why these things aren't just toys.
And we've had a lot of challenges in the early days where they were too tight and they would crack, which destroys the keycap, of course.
Yeah, and people are scared they're going to crack, so they don't want to put them on their boards, and they really just sit in the box saying, might as well be designer toys.
It's a difficult place to perform and function.
Box switches. Remember box switches?
So to back up to your original question, there are a lot of different ways that you can implement stems. And you can see a lot of makers, even just for security, for copywriting, some people do glue in a separate stem that they either fabricate it through a different method, or maybe it's injection molded, or they just have a verified stem, and maybe because they want to, or because their process for creating the master cap won't let them use resin kind of all at the same time, then they glue it in after, maybe capture serum for under that, maybe it's a material. Yeah, so there's a lot of ways to do it, and really, it's dictated by what the requirements of your master are. Like if you're doing a metal master, metal stems aren't great, they don't have the flexibility, so that's a common one where you use one process to fabricate your metal master, and then you go glue in some kind of plastic stem so the function stays the same. Or like some people do polymer clay and they sculpt directly on top of an existing blank, just get a GMK blank, and then sculpt on top. And it really is just preserving that function while also preserving your ability to express your art in whatever means you need to. But
great.
It's
a good point.
Great. Any other questions from the audience?
So, I'm interested in making artisans out of borosilicate glass.
Oh, cool.
Which melts at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, so can't really use silicone for molding that.
I've already looked. I used to do glass blowing, so
Sacrificial
Uh,
molds,
yeah.
right?
I have had success with using like a resin base and then just like melting the glass into the top of it.
mhm.
What would you use to make the stem also glass? Like,
So what my thought was to machine 2 pieces of carbon graphite and then actually like blow it into it.
okay.
Yeah, but the stem is the kicker that I was struggling with too, which is why we never actually did it. It's impossible. So I mean, as far as bonding those 2 things together, I
You have
mean,
a stem insert. You
it would
have
be
a
an
metal stem
an insert type thing, yeah. Where what I would do is probably like so this is the difficult thing is that if you're casting each glass piece individually, it's going to be slightly different shape than the last one, which makes it hard to attach the stem to it because you can't seed it in a mold and then pour resin and attach it that way. Not to mention that resin's probably not going to adhere to borosilicate glass very well, which is the other thing. I don't know. Wait, let me think about it a bit, and I'll find you later and talk to you about it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I've never blown glass, but if I was to sort of like hypothesize on it, I would have a separate piece that was either maybe ceramic or metal that would just like glue in.
Like a whole,
Like this.
Oh,
See
you know
this
what?
cap here?
Like a whole skirt, like a whole thin skirt with the stem attached.
Yeah,
that
you could
all
like
sits
glass blow
underneath.
the toppers.
Just the top. Yeah,
Yeah.
you'd like cast like a regular key and then make the glass to like fit on top and then bond them with epoxy or something.
Yeah.
And then maybe build some like underhangs so that the glass like hooks onto that and it can't like come apart.
Yeah,
that's
like
gonna
a
be
snap in.
It's gonna be.
Any other questions from audience?
Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah.